So good evening, everybody, and the time is upon us. And I hope you can hear me. That's the first question. No, can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay, okay. I think I've got it. Okay. So welcome to Stonington Free Library. My name is Belinda Decay, and I'm the Director Emeritus of the library. And thank you all for being here for the last of our 2023 Sunday evening lecture series. And first, I would like to say a special word of thanks to our staff, particularly our director, Michaela Hall, and Millie Donovan, our staff member, who are here today making everything work. And also to Carla Amland, our assistant director, who in fact heads up the whole program committee and has made it all possible this year. And lastly, I'd like to thank our dedicated volunteers who work all year to make this wonderful program series possible. So I also welcome all those tuning in by live stream from near and far. And I know one friend and neighbor who is joining us from Paris at this very moment. So that's wonderful to think about. And I'm sure, given the very large stage that our guest tonight walks on, there are people from all over the country with us tonight. So welcome to you all. We are in all ways a library without walls, a library that can be accessed 24/7 when you have a library card. So one more thing, I would ask you please to make sure your cell phones are silenced. And now it is my honor, on behalf of Stonington Free Library, to welcome our distinguished guest, the poet Henri Cole, a Stonington resident, a friend and neighbor, whose poetry has received international recognition and every imaginable award. I counted up to 26. I'm not going to mention them, including his election to the American Academy of Arts and Letters in 2017. Throughout his long teaching career, Professor Cole has taught at many of our major educational institutions and is currently teaching at Claremont College in California. He is the author of 11 books, is that right, Henri? 11 books of poetry, several of which have been translated into French, Spanish, Italian, German, and Arabic. You only have to look at the display behind me to see the breadth and range of the writers that have been influences in his writing life. There's Baudelaire, Valery, Rimbaud, Rilke, Keats, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and in the 21st century, Louise Glück, Seamus Heaney, Jody Graham, and that's just a few. It's all that I could fit in. But it's a wonderful, wonderful list. His collection of essays, Orphic Paris, is an entrancing reflection on the time he spent in Paris and what it meant to his development as a writer. Here he is describing a group of horses as they go down Boulevard Saint-Michel one morning. Their phalanx seemed to me like a poetry muscle exercising itself to remain strong. The precise movements of each horse and rider, like the lines of a poem moving across a blank page, representing the highest degree of control, of selection and omission, as the language is assembled into art. Today, Professor Cole will be reading from his latest collection of such poems, Gravity and Center, Selected Sonnets 1994 to 2022, a book that has received much critical acclaim. You will be able to purchase a copy in the lobby following the reading. The title of a very fine review by Daisy Freed in the New York Times in April of this year is A Poet Whose Swerves Capture the World in 14 Lines. And it really is a wonderful review. It also turned up on the bedside table of Jane Ann Phillips. She mentioned it in her By the Book interview in a recent New York Times review. We are so honored and grateful to have you here with us today, and to make sure you are a true citizen of Stonington Borough, I present you with the keys of the kingdom, your own library card. You have to have one. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to our distinguished guest, the poet Henri Cole. Up to you.
Thank you, Belinda, for making me feel so welcome. When I came here first 2 years ago as a James Merrill House fellow, the first thing you notice when you approach the town is the position of the library on the square at the top of the town. And to me, this reminded me of, I don't know, places I'd been to in Greece and Sicily, where it was like the temple of the of the village was for books, and that appealed to me very much. And it feels very nice to live just a block from this building. I'm honored actually to live so close by. I thought today I would read from this book that Belinda kindly mentioned called Gravity and Center. The title, maybe I could say that the title came to me after my father died. There were all these physics books, and my father was an engineer, trained as an engineer, and his books never meant much to me, but I took a couple of them at the time that we were sort of dispersing his possessions. And I found that when I looked through his books, some of the illustrations were very moving to me. And one of them was called Gravity and Center in this physics textbook, really. So that's where the title came from. So all the poems that I'm going to be reading are sonnet length. And well, except at the end, I'm going to read one called 107 Water Street, which is a little longer. So I call them sonnet length because they're not really rhymed or metered, but they have the sort of fractures and leaps and resolutions in them that the sonnet form enables. And so I think of them sort of as an updating, you might say, of a classic form. I think whenever a poet writes in the form, the poet is interested in I don't know, metamorphosing it, mutating it a little bit. So that's what I've done for 30 years. And during COVID, I visited a class via Zoom at USC in Los Angeles. And after the class, a student wrote to me and said, had I ever thought of putting together all of my sonnets? And I hadn't ever thought of that, actually. And that's how the book came about. He was a graduate student and who, sort of knew my work. He was a fan, and I'm grateful to him. So I thought I'd begin with this poem. I'd begin with a sort of seaside poem. One of the pleasures of being in Stonington for me was swimming with a small group of loons, we call ourselves. This is called Gulls. Well, let's see, it mentions Ulro and Beulah, and those are sort of parts of the William Blake mythology. They're sort of undeveloped states. Gulls, naked, hairy, trembling, I dove into the green, where I saw a bulky form that was Mother in her pink swimsuit, pushing out of water. So I kicked deeper beyond a sugar boat and Blake's Ulro and Beulah, beyond grief, fate, fingers, toes, and skin, beyond speech, plagues of the blood, and flowers thrown on a coffin, beyond eros and the disease of incompleteness. And as I swam, I saw myself against the sky and against the light, a tiny human knot with eyes, my numb hands and repeated motion like the gulls aloft, touching the transparent structure of the world. And in that icy, green, silvery frothing, I was straightening all that I had made crooked. When I was 45, I had the opportunity to go back and live in the country of my birth, which is Japan. And this poem is set there at the Nara Deer Park. I don't know if you've been to Nara, but there are 1,000 semi-tame deer there. And, they haven't been hunted for, they're considered godlike creatures. So one afternoon, I took a nap with a deer, and that's really the occasion for this poem called Green Shade. Nara Deer Park. With my head on his spotted back and his head on the grass, a little bored with the quiet motion of life, and a cluster of mosquitoes making hot black dunes in the air. We slept with the smell of his fur engulfing us. It was as if my dominant functions were gazing and dreaming in a field of semi-wild deer. It was as if I could dream what I wanted, and what I wanted was to long for nothing, no facts, no reasons, never to say again, I want to be like him, and to lie instead in the hollow, deep grass without esteem or riches, gazing into the big lacquer black eyes of a deer. Hello to all those that are live streaming, to Rachel in Boston and Stuart in Paris and Penny on Main Street. um, let's see, this poem is called Original Face, which was a kind of translation of the face you wake up with. For a woman, it's the face you wake up with before you put your makeup on, original face. I like that idea. Original face. Some mornings I wake up kicking like a frog. My thighs ache from going nowhere all night. I get up tailless, smooth-skinned, eyes protruding, and scrub around for my original face. It is good I am dreaming, I say to myself. The real characters and events would hurt me. The real lying, shame, and envy would turn even a pleasure-loving man into a stone. Instead, my plain human flesh wakes up and gazes out at real sparrows skimming the luminous, wet rooftops at the base of a mountain. No splayed breasts, no glaring teeth appear before me. only the ivory hands of morning touching the real face in the real mirror on my bureau. This poem is sort of a father poem. These poems in this book cover 30 years during a time during which both of my parents um, died. My father came from North Carolina, and his parents were sharecroppers. They grew peaches and tobacco in the sandhills of North Carolina, a part of North Carolina which really isn't the New South. It's still pretty much like it was, and that's where he's buried. So this is kind of a portrait poem of him called Oil and Steel. My father lived in a dirty dish mausoleum, watching a portable black and white television, reading the Encyclopedia Britannica, which he preferred to modern fiction. One by one, his schnauzers died of liver disease, except the one that guarded his corpse, found holding a tumbler of Bushmills. Dead is dead, he would say, an anti-preacher. I took a plaid shirt from the bedroom closet and some motor oil, my inheritance. Once I saw him weep in a courtroom, neglected, needing nursing, this man who never showed me much affection, but gave me a knack for solitude, which has been mostly useful. For a lot of summers, I went to the Adirondacks, to a place called Blue Mountain Lake, a great place for swimming. Nothing tops it, really. And this poem is set there. One summer, I took care of a flock of hens that got adopted by a ranger after I left. Um, and that's really it. That's all I have to say about this. I suppose hens are forbidden in the backyard here. I haven't thought, I haven't pushed that envelope yet. Um, Hens. It's good for the ego when I call and they come running, squawking and clucking, because it's feed time. And once again, I can't resist picking up little Lazarus, an orange and white pullet I adore. Yes, yes, everything will be okay, I say to her glaring mongrel face. Come September, she'll begin to lay the blue-green eggs I love poached. God dooms the snake to taste nothing but the dust, and the hen to 4,000 or so ovulations. Poor Lazarus. Last spring, an intruder murdered her sisters and left her garroted in the coop. There's a way the wounded light up a dark rectangular space. Suffering becomes the universal theme. Too soft and you'll be squeezed. Too hard and you'll be broken. Even a hen knows this, posing on a manure pile, her body a stab of gold. It's only been 10 minutes and it feels like 30 minutes have gone, gone by. Let's see. Um, let's see. These poems take about 1 minute each. They're like delicious potato chips. Um, I suppose this is an ocean poem as well. This is set up on the Cape Cod. I love the green and brown seaweed floating freely on the surface of the water like a Jackson Pollock, or an enormous bed in which the world is no longer a place of rigid structures. I feel drawn to it, but also to the sea with all its gigantic beauty pushing against us and below. I want to look at you, but I do not. The edge of the beach brims with light that glides down around our legs and then down into the folded depths from which the waves erupt, toppling us suddenly into their undulating plash, connecting over a vast terrain of ditches, the salt of sweat, the salt of tears, and the salt of the sea. I have a lot of poems about bees. Um, I think of bees as well, we were talking about this at dinner one night not too long ago, um, as a good, as bees, as a good representation for poets, that they take something raw and like human experience. Um, they take something raw, pollen, nectar, like human experience, and convert it into something gold, like honey, or but a poem or poetry. So I have a lot of poems in which that metaphor is used, and this is one of them. It's called Face of the Bee. Um, it uses the word cisgender, which just means I identify with my gender. Um, Face of the Bee. Staggering out of a black-red peony, where you have been hiding all morning from the frigid air, you regard me smearing jam on dark toast. Suddenly I am waving my arms to make you go away. No one is truly the owner of his own instincts, but controlling them. This is civilization. I thank my mother and father for this. After they died, there were replacements whose force upon my life I cannot measure. With your fuzzy black face, do you see me? A cisgender male, metabolizing life into language, like nectar sipped up and regurgitated into gold. I do have a lot of creature poems, uh, um, and I think it's the case that when you're given a mask, like the animal world or myth or um, fairy tale, you're able to go farther, push farther than you might just speaking for yourself. Um, let's see, this poem is called To a Snail. I haven't seen too many snails here, just I've seen very large worms here. I have to write write a poem, a worm poem, I guess. This is called To a Snail. This is a snail I saw on the road uh, in Umbria, I think. Um, like flesh, or consciousness inhabited by flesh. Willful, bold, très chic. The skin on your gelid body is brownish from age and secretes viscid slime from your flat, muscular foot, like script, as if Agnes Martin had wed Caravaggio. And then, after rainfall, you ran away, crossing a wet road with Fiats rushing past. Where is your partner? Contemplating your tentacles in house, gliding on a trace of mucus from some dark stone to who knows where. Why do I feel happiness? It's a long game, the whole undignified, insane attempt at living. So I've relocated you to the woods. Oh, I suppose this one is sort of an eco poem. It's called haiku, though it's sonnet length, and the last 3 lines constitute a haiku. I don't know what that would be, like a sonnet coup. I don't know, sonnet high sonnet. I don't know. Haiku. After the sewage flowed into the sea and took the oxygen away, the fishes fled, but the jellies didn't mind. They stayed and ate up the food the fishes left behind. I sat on the beach in my red pajamas and listened to the sparkling foam, like feelings being fustigated. Nearby, a crayfish tugged on a string. In the distance, a man waved. Unnatural cycles seemed to be establishing themselves without regard to our lives. Deep inside, I could feel a needle skip. Autumn dark, murmur of the saw, poor humans. Let me get just a little drink. In the 1980s, I lived in New York for a dozen years. That's how I know Gigi. That's how I met James Merrill, actually. And that's how I experienced the AIDS epidemic, which this poem looks back to that time. I didn't really write any poems about that experience until long after. Jonathan asked for this poem, so I'm going to read it. Keep Me, it's called. I found a necktie on the street, a handmade silk tie from an Italian designer. Keep me, it pleaded from the trash. There's probably a story it could tell me of calamity days long ago. Then yesterday, tying a Windsor knot around my neck, I heard voices. Why have you got that old tie on? Suddenly, Mason, Roy, Jimmy, and Miguel were pulling at my arms like it was the 80s again, a darksome decade with another hard-right president. My lips were not yet content with stillness. We were on our way home from a nightclub. I adore you, Miguel moaned, but have to return now. Remember, death ends a life, not a relationship. I think I'll read one more from the book and then a few new ones, and then we can have a little conversation. This one is called On Friendship. It was written during COVID. I think this poem appeared in the New Yorker during COVID. It was sort of a time when I was having dinner once a week with a friend who's on the Zoom or the YouTube. And that was sort of my human contact for the week. On friendship. Lately, remembering anything involves an ability to forget something else. Watching the news, I writhe and moan. My mind is not itself. Lying next to a begonia from which black ants come and go, I drink a vodka. Night falls. This seems a balm for wounds that are not visible in the gaudy daylight. Sometimes a friend cooks dinner. Our lives commingle. In loneliness, I fear me, but in society, I'm like a soldier kneeling on soft mats. Everything seems possible, as when I hear birds that awaken at 4 a.m. or see a veil upon a face. Beware, the heart is lean red meat. The mind feeds on this. I carry on my shoulder a bow and arrow for protection. I believe whatever I do next will surpass what I have done. I think that was my phone vibrating there. I'm sorry. Yeah, someone was calling me. Yeah, I think I'll read 3 new poems. I think there's time for them in conversation. Yeah, it feels like I've been up here an hour. Let's see. This is called I Am 67. This poem is called At 65. So it's a little old. Maybe I should call it At 67. This is, I guess it's kind of tragic what we poets do to seem original. This is 2 sonnet length poem stanzas hooked together, so it's not really much of a variation. But I was proud of it nonetheless. At 65, it was all so different than he expected. For years, he'd been agnostic. Now he meditated. For years, he dreamed of being an artist living abroad. Now he reread Baudelaire, Emerson, Bishop. He'd never considered marriage. Still, a force through green did fuse. Yes, he wore his pants looser. No, he didn't do crosswords in bed. No, he didn't file for Social Security. Yes, he danced alone in the bathroom mirror, since younger men expected generosity. Long ago, his thesis had been described as promising, with psychological heat and the consuming will of nature. Now he thought, this then is all? On the rooftop, in pale, flickering moonlight, he pondered the annihilated earth. At the pond, half a mile across, was not too far to swim, because he seemed to be going toward something. Yes, the love impulse had frequently revealed itself in terms of conflict, but this was an old sound, an austere element. Yes, he'd been no angel, and so what? Yes, tiny moths emerged from the hall closet. Yes, the odor of kombucha made him sick. Yes, he lay for hours pondering the treetops, the matriarchal clouds, the moon. Though his spleen collected melancholy trophies, his imagination was not impeded. These last two poems are Stonington poems. They're JM poems, I guess, really. Um, the last time I saw JM, James Merrill, was here. It was the summer before he died. I came to visit J.D. McClatchy, and we were having lunch, and James Merrill came and had lunch with us down some former manifestation of the Dock restaurant at the Breakwater. That's now the Breakwater. Um, I don't know which one to read first. Maybe I'll read the 107 Water Street, since some of you have read that. It's been some kind soul has put it, I think Cynthia did that, put it on the door of the James Merrill house. It has an epigraph from James Merrill called Small Town is largely a state of mind. Um, Maybe I should say that, in my 30s, there was probably no poet I loved and admired more than James Merrill. He was really at his pinnacle, and I was just a nascent, young comer. But he was very generous to me, and gosh, I think I received 2 James Merrill grants in my, most nascent years. Um, And his example seems to me quite extraordinary still on the scene of American poetry, though it has changed quite a bit. 107 Water Street. Small town is largely a state of mind. That's from The Changing Light at Sandover. All the sailboats in the harbor face north. I can see 24 from your study window. Overhead, large white birds fly around in the September glow. The sky is baby blue without a single cloud. The house at 25 Main Street finally sold. Isn't that where Venture Smith lived? He was the son of a prince who purchased his freedom. History cannot be unlived. Chez Perigny, I visited David's ashes under a chestnut where edible mushrooms, phallus, ravenelli, now grow. And Libby, a rescue dog from Tennessee, nuzzled me and licked my lashes. At the farmer's market, the cheesemonger wouldn't stop talking. A young man at Nana's bakery gave me a brioche and smiled kindly. And Mrs. Purity of Purity Farm, I love her peaches, stepped right out of a small Dutch painting. All night I hear the clinking halyard lines. Before dawn, I buy a coffee at Tom's newsstand, then sit with your big petite Larousse, La Fontaine, and my ardor. September is a time to feel the light, write, scratch out, write, nap, walk, begin again. I am too afraid of jellyfish to swim with Jonathan. I am too afraid of jellyfish to swim with Jonathan out to the breakwater. Instead, I sit with Penny at her long dining table and eat boeuf bourguignon. You make me feel I almost belong. And this is a poem that hasn't appeared yet, but is going to appear. It's called Autumn Fern. While I was here last year, no. I know. I guess it was during my Merrill residency. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, Jeff and Lynn Callahan, let me. Well, we dug up a fern from their front yard and planted it on Merrill's grave, between the two graves, David's and James's graves, and I think it's still surviving, but it's half of what it was. I'm a little worried about it, but the poem is about the experience is a result of planting that fern. Autumn fern. I hope you won't mind a fern on your grave, standing on the shovel to dig a deep hole. I'm a year younger than you are now. I've written a will and reread the old masters, swimming out to the breakwater. Maybe a part of me is you touching buoy 328 before turning back to the Borough Beach. Maybe my hairy body is like a drone's eating pollen grains from 1,000 flowers, spreading nectar across the comb in darkness, then flapping my wings to dry up the water and hasten the creation of viscous honey. If the lane to the dead is generative, as you said, let this hole be a point of light. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we do have 15 minutes, I think, left. If you want to have questions, you want to, yeah, yeah. I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah. There's no bad question, usually. Um, anybody have a question? Thank you for this library card. I thank you. Gigi.
I have a question on it. Is it the last two poems are obviously still? Is it too early to tell if there might be more coming?
I don't think it's too early to tell. No, I have met some amazing people. People, that have been working on my house who have said so many amazing things to me. I would love to put a lot of that stuff into poems. I would love to do that. Um, I don't know quite how yet. Yeah, I'm trying to start a garden. I don't quite know yet, but I'm excited. I feel the the setting of the ocean and I wouldn't mind. Well, I took a tour with the Post of a scallop boat. I wouldn't mind writing an article about scallops. Actually, I think that would be fascinating. I learned so much from that boat tour, and then I went and read about scallops, and I love scallops. So I thought that would be kind of fun thing to write about. But who knew? Who knew? Yes. Oh, it's a great boat. He was very, well, I guess it was his captain that gave us the tour, a wonderful tour. Be fun to go out and sleep in those bunks overnight. When I was a teenager, I used to sleep in a sloop with my father, and that's what it reminded me of down below. With there were about 10 bunks, weren't there, Jonathan? Yes, Ken. Well, the first ones that I wrote were in rhyme, actually, kind of tragically in rhyme. But the first ones, that are in my first books, this selection of sonnets comes from 5 books. I had some quite strict ones, but I didn't put them in this. I thought I would just keep it over 30 years instead of more. I could see doing that. I could see becoming just, like a tight, narrow, formal poet. No, I could, but doing something, Dionysian inside the form, kind of bad boy inside the form. I could see doing that. I think that would be fun, but then as soon as you've done that, then you got to do something else. You know, does it annoy you that they don't rhyme? They, yeah, they have these sort of switchbacks in them that I try and let's see. Do I have any compensation for rhyme? I guess I don't. No. Yes, Belinda.
So, Henri, would you still write sonnets? Would you,
Well,
are you writing?
the Autumn Fern is a a free sonnet, I guess you could say. But I do feel, well, I've thought a lot about this reading Eliot and reading, I'm in this T.S. Eliot reading group here in Stonington, which is, a kind of great privilege and pleasure. But one of the things he said is to be a great poet, you have to write, a great big poem, basically. And one time I went and asked everybody, and they all just kind of looked at me, and nobody said, "Yes, you have to do that, Henri." they were all, they probably everyone knew I wrote sonnet-like poems, so I don't know. They were very respectful. But I wonder about that. Do you have to write a great big poem to be an important American poet? Um, I think Merrill thought that, you know.
Well,
Um,
actually, I was thinking about that reading your book,
yes,
and I was reading one poem.
yes.
You
My
know,
book. Oh, the prose book.
no,
Oh, oh, my new book.
Gravity and Center.
Oh, uh-huh.
Can you just read it through?
It is like one. It's like, what is it? It's like episodes, chapters. It's collage. You could
Yes.
say it's collage. Yes.
So there
Well,
you have your
yes. Well, I think if you're a lyric poet, as I am a lyric poet, that is that I'm not interested in telling a story. I hate linearity. What I'm giving instead are kind of snapshots of the self in moments of being. If you want to do a big poem, all you can do is string together lots of these snapshots of moments of being. And, um, my model for the sonnets was really, when I first began to write them, I wrote sequences kind of modeled after Merrill. He has a very famous poem called The Broken Home. I wrote a poem called Chiffon Morning, which was a portrait of my parents' marriage in 6 sonnets, and it is just like 6 little chapters that gives you snapshots of of their marriage, um, and that's what he did. Um, um, the poems kind of expand and contract and expand and contract if you write a lyric sequence that way. Um, but that's kind of different than the Eliot experience that we've been having. Um, it seems to me. Yes, Willard. No, I think probably, yeah. I mean, I'm charmed. I mean, La Fontaine is interesting because he's not really lyric. He's sort of his poem. I've translated with a wonderful French poet, a wonderful 98-year-old French poet named Claire Malroux, 50 of the La Fontaine fables, which are, humans very occasionally appear in them, but they're meant to be, you know, satirical about human nature, basically. But um, I think, I mean, in those poems, you do get narrative, and then you get what would you call it, aphorism? They conclude with aphoristic, you know, sound bites of knowledge about humans. And surely that's what drew me to that. But I don't think I've done writing as narrative as that is. Not all of them are narrative, but he gets more narrative. He wrote 12 books of them, and they become more and more expansive and narrative throughout his life. He wrote about 200 plus fables. Yes, I don't see you. Do I know you? Yeah. No. Brooke, nice to meet you.
There was a talk the other night. Talking about
Yes, I was there. Yeah.
right.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, I mean, you write lovely things in this, but how does climate change influence?
Well, one thing about my sense of eco poets, you know, I teach on the West Coast where there are many self-described eco poets. I think in an eco poem, the self is not supposed to be front and center. The earth is supposed to be front and center. So that goes a little bit against my sense of the lyric. Um, but I write about the earth all the time. You know, I mean, I grew up in rural Virginia, and I did sail with my father. He had a sloop as a teenager, and you know, I was a kind of shy, solitary kid. You know, so animals and the earth, you know, to me that's where God was. You know, I didn't really believe in God, but to me that was God. Nature and the earth were God, and I felt that from a very early age. That's a very, you know, personal, serious thing to say, but it's true. Yes, Susan? Jelly? What do you mean poem? Oh, jelly. What do you mean? Oh, jelly. What is he talking about? Um, jelly. Well, that's a funny poem. That's a funny poem to request. Do you think people will understand that poem? Jelly? This poem is called Jelly. Is that what it's called? Yeah, Jelly. When I was in college, my first poetry teacher was a woman named Susan Thompson, and her Susan's partner was Betty, uh, and Betty was blind. And Betty, well, I was from this sort of tight military Virginia family, and they were, you know, like, I don't know, these two lesbians sort of made me feel free. Um, and Betty loved horses. She loved horseback riding, and she rode horses blind. And I wrote this poem really for her, but I can't find it. I'm sorry. I don't. Here it is, 160. I'd love to see Betty again. Betty lives in New Hampshire. Maybe if you're there, Betty, thank you for this poem. Um, it's it's called Jelly, and then I'll close with this. Is that okay? Yeah. For Betty Bird and Susan Thompson. Rubbing the bristle brush across his backbone, securing the bridle, riding his stretched out body on the dirt road to town, past the Texaco station, and following his head through hair grass and cornflowers. She was some kind of in-between creature, browned from the sun. To the sightless, at the State School for the Deaf and Blind, knowledge came in small words, under over, next to, inside. But it was the clip-clop of Jelly's hooves, his fragrant mane and muscle memory that carried her forward, hollering, "Run, Jelly, run!" Then, with one soft, firm whoa, he did, though she was only 6, her child hands gripping the reins tight, hearts thumping, a testimony to the love feeling. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. I'll be happy to sign books if anyone, I'll hang around a while and sign books. Thank you.